Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. The two biggest economic lies of 2021 and the single biggest truth of all time. Let's explore. 2021 has been quite a year. In some way, think that it has topped the previous year, which was quite unprecedented with the ultimate black swan that we've seen in this century, the coronavirus pandemic. We still are dealing with it, but in different variants, different forms, and the impact economically is profound in multiple different ways. It did start last year with the relief packages that were introduced and passed by Congress after pretty much mandated shutdowns by all levels of government. And so therefore, people and businesses got bailouts because it was through no fault of their own that they were forced to shut down. In retrospect, was it the wisest thing to do? Well, I'll leave that to historians, but nonetheless, at the time, I was actually for it because we really didn't know the magnitude of the pandemic and the like. But in retrospect, looking back, I don't know that it was the right thing to do. But again, historians will make that judgment. But what sparked from that this year is a continuation of more of the same, plus more spending by the government, infrastructure spending, and that on top of quantitative easing by the Federal Reserve. Now, it should be noted that before the pandemic even started, the Federal Reserve was doing some things that I had documented on this channel with what is called repurchase agreements, where there is money injected into the banking system for these overnight loans, and that has gone on to the tune of $700+ billion. And that was occurring before the pandemic was a blip in the radar on the news cycle. So there's been a continuation of this quantitative easing that has been quite profound in the last 2 years. And what's interesting about this is that it's a continuation of what has happened since the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. You may remember when there was a Republican in the White House that some of these institutions were just deemed too big to fail. And then there's the famous quote by George W. Bush that we must abandon free market principles in order to preserve the free market. Tell me how that makes any sense to anyone. Now we are doing much more of the same, in fact amplified to an amazing degree, as we are seeing our national debt rise to the tune of almost $29 trillion. It will be $30 trillion very, very soon. And right now we have a package that is being debated upon. There's two different packages that are being debated upon. And one is to the tune of almost $5 trillion for both of these packages. One actual infrastructure spending and the other human infrastructure spending, a lot of social programs and a lot of very, very draconian and intrusive measures that many people feel violates our Fourth Amendment, especially in terms of our bank accounts. And very scary times we're living in. But it is off of this precipice of what we are dealing with right now. An undeniable inflation scenario is before us. And that is something that no one is denying. It is a truth that even the arbiters of this massive spending and free money policies, which essentially accounts to what is known as modern monetary theory, yea, though there's nothing modern about it, this is just more of the same type of thing that we saw with the Weimar Republic, with Zimbabwe, and other nations that are just printing their way out of money troubles. But we know where that leads, and we're seeing it right now. So what is the first lie that has been instituted by the financial institutions, mainly the Federal Reserve, but also politicians? Well, it is that inflation is transitory. That is the first lie. Inflation is transitory. As we get in closer and we see this dollar that we have seen to some point to be this arbiter and this safety net, the world's top reserve currency here, the dollar, has been trusted. It is a top dog in the reserve currencies out there. And so when we see that it is inflating, well, it's just a temporary thing. I mean, after all, we are the cleanest of the dirty shirts in the laundry pile in our financial institutions. So we can go with that hubris to think that we will survive this and we will get through. It's just a transitory situation. And that was the talk for several months when we started to notice higher inflation. Pretty much after each term of measuring by the most liberal standards, pun intended there, because they have certainly changed how the outlook of it is. And liberal in this case means conservative. In other words, by some measures, it is a lower number than what the number used to be measured by. Some people feel it's 10, 11%, even though officially it's just over 5%. You remember it wasn't that long ago when it was when the Federal Reserve was okay with targeting 2.5% inflation. In other words, a very slight inflation for a little while until everything comes back together again after all the business is open. And people thought, well, we could just restart the economy kind of where it was. And perhaps after 2 weeks of being shut down, yeah, perhaps you could. It may take a month or two to reinstitute everything and all the supply chains, but, obviously it lasted much longer than 2 months, and there's all sorts of different factors that come into play with these supply chains that continue to haunt us to this day. So therefore, that dollar, which we see as this powerful thing here, $1, well, it's starting to get smaller. Its value is shrinking. The shrinking dollar is something that we are seeing. And I tell you what, if this is a transitory situation, it's pretty long train. That's for sure. In other words, we know it's a lie. We know that inflation is not transitory. It's here, and it's here to stay for quite some time. I would almost go as far as to say that it is pretty much unavoidable that it is going to continue to inflate and perhaps even hyperinflate at the rate we're going. If we continue at the rate we're going, and with the talk of tapering in the works, when is it going to come and what form is it going to take? With the economy being the way it is now, with prices up and with different mandates that are out there, such as these vaccine mandates that are in effect, well, that's going to be more people that are going to be out of work or fired because of these mandates. It's already a tough time finding people to fill positions as it is the case right now. And because of the stymies that are out there, the free money from the federal government and state governments, and of course some of that was supposed to end, but people aren't coming back to work yet and living off that money. And there's these other essentially what amounts to universal basic income for a time, though that was supposed to be temporary as well. How long can this last? Without people to fill positions, well, things are not going to get to people quickly enough, such as things like pocket change. You've heard me talk about the coin shortage as well. And that's one example of how supply chains can be disrupted because of lack of drivers for the armored vehicles that I talked about. In other areas in the supply chain, truck drivers, there's a shortage of truck drivers. And we know that there are trucks lined up at the ports of Los Angeles, but a lot of those are just a few of the many more needed to deliver goods across the fruited plain and across the United States to the different locations and destinations for these products and goods and services. And so therefore, we know that inflation is not transitory. It's here. And maybe to some point, some could make an argument that it's by design. We might as well go ahead and inflate the dollar because we're going to reset it anyway. Talked about central bank digital currency in the United States moving in that direction. And some say that through a Bank of International Settlements that they are pretty much giving the outline for it to happen. Here in the United States, there will be a reset. They're talking openly about it, and a global reset that is going to have an effect on the dollar with caveats. And those caveats and conditions are based off of how it will be designed with social credits or social engineering with our currency. Very scary stuff. As well as being able to track every purchase. Every time you spend a dollar, whether it be physical or digital, there will probably be something likened to some sort of code, some sort of QR code, that each of these notes, these Federal Reserve notes, will be scanned in that QR code, and attached to that QR code will be the blockchain, the transaction. Okay, this dollar was used to buy a loaf of bread at the supermarket at this location, at this time. Maybe not necessarily to track to an individual, but more likely they can track it to you through security camera footage at any particular point in time. Now, what does the government care if you buy a loaf of bread? But what if it was something like a firearm, or, well, firearms already tracked, but any other thing that you may buy, such as your local coin shop. If you buy gold or silver, same thing. They may have to track it through that regard. I don't know what form it's going to take. But nonetheless, even paper currency, even the physical, will indeed be tracked under this new system, I feel. And that's part of what the central bank digital currency is about. And we already know that through some of the proposals that they want to be able to track your bank accounts. And to me, that is a little bit scary. Actually, it's a lot scary. So we know inflation is something that is not transitory. And so the first lie, since we know it's true and it's lasting longer, they've admitted to it now. Started out as a lie, and now they're saying, well, looks like this transitory inflation is not as transitory as we thought. Paraphrasing a quote from a couple of presidents ago, Barack Obama said, well, it looks like these shovel-ready jobs weren't as shovel-ready as we thought. Well, fast forward now to 2021, and here we are. Inflation is beyond transitory. In fact, now, the second lie is repeated by the White House now, that, hey, maybe inflation isn't such a bad thing, or it's basically a first-class problem. It's not really such a bad thing because it means people are spending money because they have higher wages, such as our 2-month paternity on leave Secretary of the Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, just mentioned that, hey, it's all good, and it's a good thing because, well, it means that President Biden's economic policies are lifting people up. Well, because wages are higher. Well, why are wages higher? Well, because they're trying to compete with the federal government for their stymies that they've been throwing out. Businesses are trying their best just to stay afloat, so they're raising wages, dropping their profit margins in order to compete with the federal government. And to me, that's a pretty sad state of affairs. It actually shows the exact opposite thing. But not only that, but it's also trying to keep pace with inflation. And so when you think about it, if somebody from year to year gets a 5.2 or 5%, let's just say 5% salary increase, this year they are actually getting a pay cut because inflation is running at 5.4, 5.5%. And so therefore, this notion that inflation is a good thing is now actually being talked about openly by White House officials. What a sad state of affairs when actually a political movement is actually saying inflation is a good thing. Boy, have the tables have turned. And people voted for this administration? Hard to believe, hard to imagine, but it has happened. And I can safely say and proudly say that I had nothing to do with any of that. None of us should endorse the idea that inflation is good by any administration official, by any stretch or any measure. And so therefore, this leads us to the one single biggest fundamental economic truth of all time, and that is silver. and gold. Silver and gold are the one areas that will protect you from inflation. Indeed, they sure will. By any stretch, and by the way, sometimes it will take a stretch of time and measure, these metals have stood the test of time and have provided value to those who hold them. They are fundamentally money, and they have been for thousands of years, and that is the ultimate truth that will protect us from economic instability, number one, deflation, number two. And how does it work against deflation? Well, it means that as the value of the dollar increases, or the value of goods and services decrease, or the price of goods and services decrease, and the value of the dollar increases, well, these silver and gold decrease much less. That's right. So you are able to hold out against a deflationary period as well, too, which, by the way, a deflationary period is relatively short-lived. In fact, it's kind of what is some economists say is the precursor to hyperinflation, which we know that gold and silver protect during those times. Now, in that fundamental truth is the fact that right now, as of the recording of this video, for the year 2021, gold and silver have not protected yourself against, or yourselves against, inflation as of right now for 2021. I would make the argument that it takes some time for this to occur, and it also depends on how you buy these metals. Diversification, not only in terms of assets that you do to preserve your wealth, but also temporal diversification. And that's probably going to be a subject for a different video, but basically what that means is that you are protected by using intelligent dollar cost averaging. You buy more when the price is lower, you buy less when the price is higher. And you do that through a course of time, and it'll all average out. Gold and silver have proven themselves to be wealth preservation tools with an ever-decreasing value of the dollar. So that is the fundamental truth that stands the test of time, as I've talked about in prior videos. If you look through, especially look through gold and silver proving their worth 100 years. If you search my videos for those, you will see that I've talked about it through the course of 100 years. You can see how they have proven their worth. Now, most of us are not going to hold gold and silver for 100 years or buy it through that course of time, but much less time is needed in order to preserve your wealth. In the end, it is about protecting yourself financially and economically, and that's what gold and silver provide to do, and that's why we stack it. I think most people understand that in this community, and so I thought I'd share this information with you, and I'd be very curious to see what your thoughts are. And again, it's all about wealth preservation. It's about the truth. And the truth lies in exactly what these metals are and what they've done for thousands of years, despite politics, despite cultures, regimes, economies, epochs, empires, generations, or any other factor that could come into play. They really have stood the test of time. And they are ingrained in what is the foundation, at least of this nation, but also other nations around the world. That's what the fascinating part of it is. It's in the Constitution. Gold and silver, indeed, are seen as money. So there you have it. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. We'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch this video, and to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.